Welcome to Local Voices, a community podcast produced by the Echo newspaper, which takes a deep dive into the news that matters the most to you. I'm your host, Hayden Moore. June is Pride Month, a celebration and promotion of equality for LGBT plus people, and a rights movement in protest for people who are being oppressed because of their gender, identity, or sexuality. Recently, the South Dublin LGBT plus network was set up through South Dublin County Council and the Public Participation Network to create more visibility for the LGBT plus community and ensure that they have a voice in their community through a safe space for minority communities. So that brings us through to this podcast, as all three guests are members of the new network, which is now on all social media platforms. Today, we're hosting a virtual roundtable discussion. And I just had to say beforehand that this is one that you're going to want to stick around for. The three people I spoke to absolutely blew me away. Now, let's introduce our guests. Tony Fagan, thanks very much for your time. Tony.
Thank you. Very nice to be here. Sorry, I didn't know that was my cue. Thank you. It's very nice to be here with everybody.
No problem at all. Jensen Bourne, delighted to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And Agatha Sabanda, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Brilliant. I want to start with this because I thought it might be an interesting place to actually to start the conversation, and it's just around pronouns. And I want to start with yourself, actually, Tony. Do you want to tell us what your pronouns are, and tell us, I suppose, why it's important to you personally that people use the appropriate pronouns when referring to yourself?
Well, I'm him. I'm me. I'm Tony. Yeah, you know, I'm of a certain age, so I grew up in a certain time frame, and although I've adapted over the years, but you know, I grew up as a gay boy, a gay young man, and grew into being a gay man, and that's how I kind of describe myself.
Right. Okay. I'll ask yourself then, Jensen. I suppose, what pronouns do you like to be referred to as, and I suppose why is it important that people use them?
Yeah, well, my preferred pronouns, and they're not even preferred, they are the pronouns I use, are they and them. I would say more that I have pronouns that I don't prefer than ones that I do prefer. So I do not like being referred to as she or her. And for me, a lot of that comes from basic respect. It's like they're not my pronouns. If you're referring to me by the wrong name all the time, I might get a bit irritated. I try to be understanding, and like an example would be my mother finds it quite difficult because, again, similar to yourself, Tony, she's from an older generation. But I guess it's just not how I see myself. It's not the space I embody. And when people see it as not really an issue, I do use that comparison of using the wrong name. And you don't have to respect it, but you also don't have to expect me to respond well to it if I've communicated it to you respectfully. And I think people make mistakes. People do make mistakes, or, you know, it's difficult, and I understand and respect that. But intent is very important. And I think if you're making an effort to respect somebody and doing what you can, that is the difference. And like, my mother tries, so I'm not going to get mad at her. But it would be a bit like, I don't know, like I said, using the wrong name, somebody mispronouncing your name. You know, if somebody's making a genuine effort and it's just difficult for them, then you're like, okay. But if somebody is just like, I don't care, you're like, okay, well, you know, if this isn't a business meeting, then I just don't want to engage with you outside of this, you know. But that's just my perspective.
Do you know, even like the conversation of pronouns just seems, the way you brought it up, it can be quite frustrating, I suppose. Do you find that even like having that conversation around it where you kind of have to be like, oh, look, I'm they, them, or whatever? Do you find that that's quite frustrating in a sense as well?
I find it frustrating, but I actually think one of the hardest things for me is that I would be a bit of an introvert. So it's sometimes difficult to correct people, especially after the first time, to feel like, okay, I've already said this, and now I have to say it again. And they may not be aware of it, or maybe they are, and they just don't think it's important. But every time they use the wrong pronoun, I noticed. It's not something that I don't notice. It's like somebody's, you know, poking me. And that's not what you want in your comfortable space either, you know? And I think that for some people, it would be easier if I was straight up using he, him over she, her, because that would be easier for some people. Now, some people won't use your pronouns if they're not in accordance with what you were signed at birth, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But for they, them, some people have issues with it, thinking that it's not grammatically correct, though it is actually grammatically correct. It's just not the dominant use of that term grammatically. Like in Ireland, we actually use they, them as a non-gender specific pronoun traditionally. Like, oh, where's your sister? Oh, they're gone to the shops. It's not an unusual reply to that question, you know?
Yeah.
And we do it all the time. It's just about, I guess, challenging our comfort level, and also just being like, okay, language isn't static, you know, it evolves and we can look at things differently. And I tell somebody, if you're not used to using they, them pronouns, then just refer to me by my name, you know?
yeah. Very straightforward.
Simple.
Yeah.
Simple and straightforward. That's
Of
it.
course. Aggie, just to ask yourself then, I suppose, what are your pronouns and why are they important to you that the appropriate pronouns are used?
Well, currently I'm using she, her, but I've been going through like some self-awareness and self-evaluation and how I respond to how people, you know, use my pronouns. And it's just so weird because I don't know yet. So I don't even know where I am standing or what's happening, because I find it, sometimes I don't like being called she or her, nor do I like being called him, he.
Yeah.
But I know for a fact that, like, especially at work, there's this supervisor that always calls me Missy. Hey, Missy. And I'm like, I don't like that. And I've got like families and friends who have kids, and I like it when their kids call me uncle instead of auntie. I just feel so uncomfortable with one or the other, but I feel comfortable yet with one and the other. So I'm going through like some self-discovery there.
Okay.
It's just that, like, going back to my background, where I come from, pronouns are not something that's we don't use pronouns a lot. And there's a lot about the LGBT community that we're not aware of, or the difference. It's like we just have one term for the whole community, you know. So having been here, living here now, and having had integrated into the community and learning more about myself and accepting myself as who I am, it's just has been a journey. So it's she, her for now, and maybe later I'll have something.
Okay. Right. Aggie,
I think,
sorry, go on, go ahead.
Just to add to that quickly, is I think Aggie brought up something important about language, that, like, we're talking about English. There's plenty of languages where pronouns aren't a thing. You know, I believe Finnish is one of them, and you know, gender is derived by context, not by actual pronouns. You know, so it is a very language specific thing as well.
Yeah. And it's very interesting because, like, obviously myself, I work with words. It's something that is quite complex. But at the same time, with this, it is something that is quite straightforward as well. And obviously, it can be a barrier for some people in terms of, like, just identity. And it's something so straightforward, though. At the same time, it's quite easy. Once you, as you said, Jensen, once you're told once, you should be able to take that on board and run with it. Aggie, just to ask yourself, because you're currently living in direct provision, are you?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah. Can I ask you about that? Would you find that it's challenging for you maybe to kind of network within the LGBT plus community and kind of be out, for lack of a better term, considering like your circumstances, your living circumstances?
Yeah, it is. There's no LGBT, right? Of course there is an island, but where I am, there's no organizations or people who you can talk to, relate to, or anything. So it's like it's just me, you know what I mean? And going out there, getting help, it's really difficult to get someone within this whole process of the international protection system to get you referred to an organization where you can speak to people just like you, because it's like, you know, even though it's the big LGBTQ community, you don't just fit in any of them. There's like specific ones that you'd rather prefer to be in, like specific peer groups that you'd rather attend. So it's very difficult for that. And I know, like, I've got a roommate. It's just like in direct provision, you have to live with somebody, and it took me like, I don't know, like 6 to 8 months to come out to them. So it was really difficult because every time we'd have conversations, they'll keep on saying, "Oh, your boyfriend, oh, this your boyfriend," and I'm like, I don't know how to say this because it's so difficult because I'm scared of like the rejection, and I'm scared of how they would react. It's a whole thing, and I wish there was like more, maybe like more centers, maybe or centers, just a safe place for people in direct provision who are LGBT, where they can come together and link up.
Yeah. Where are you from originally?
Zimbabwe.
I know you said how like the pronouns aren't really a thing there. So when did you come to Ireland kind of hoping that maybe you'd have a better experience, I suppose, with your gender identity and your sexuality in a sense, and have you found yourself that hasn't really been aided at all by your living circumstances?
Oh no, yes, I did come to Ireland for like to be myself basically, and with direct provision, it hasn't really been aided, but with the community at large, it has. With socializing and finding services that best represent who I am, it's been easier for me to accept who I am. Like I've been gay my whole life, but I did not accept myself fully as a lesbian woman. And now it's easy for me to go out there and be like, I'm gay, hi, Whereas before it's like, I'd keep it to myself. I'd be scared. I wouldn't understand myself. I'd doubt myself, ask myself, like, why am I really like this? Like, am I, I'd still be I wouldn't be 100% happy with who I was back then. But now I am free, I guess is what I could say. Like, it's really nice going out there. I arrived in Ireland 2 years ago, and I was just like, I got here just a month before Pride, and I attended the Pride March, and it was amazing. It was amazing to see everybody in colors. I can't even explain the feeling. It was overwhelming.
Yeah.
So
brilliant.
yeah.
Tony, sorry, go ahead.
The community has brought that for me, but within direct provision, I think a lot of work needs to be done in it.
Yeah, no, absolutely, 100%. I think it's very apparent, very apparent. Tony, I seen you had your hand up there.
I'd like. I mean, I think it must be extraordinarily difficult in direct provision when you're placed somewhere and you don't really have any choice, and then you have to kind of navigate, negotiate with a complete stranger in a very confined space. I do some work with on and off with the direct provision in Clondalkin, in the towers, particularly with young people there. And yes, I wasn't guessing whether you were, but and Naima up there I know very well, and I've known people up there, so I'm very aware of that. But I also think that I think given the changes that have happened legislatively here since 2015 and whatever, I think the institutional frameworks that people find themselves in, if they come from an LGBT background, are enormously challenging, because that hasn't changed. The legislation is there, but actually the attitudinal changes, and people, the individuals who are the gatekeepers sometimes haven't been educated themselves to shift their attitude and their language. And secondly, the whole assumption of how when you walk through a portal in many places, they already pigeonhole you in a way, and that pigeonhole you generally is to be heterosexual normative, and that's the issue. I'm talking to people of my age and older now about, and we've talked for about the last 20 years. So what happens to all of us when we go into a care home or into places like that, in where there are certain assumptions are going to be made, and you have to always declare yourself all the time. And I think the biggest challenge is that our society is set up in such a way that the ingrained stereotypes and the ingrained prejudices and discrimination are there still, and will be for a long time, and it's always having to be challenged from the minority point of view. that nobody has looked at those institutional frameworks and say we must change this, because we actually have to look at the people who are using these resources, services, sometimes with no choice and sometimes with choice, and go, how do we accommodate difference and how do we make it inclusive? And I think that's the biggest challenge that we face here in Ireland, because there's a very deep ideology in this country which is connected with the Catholic Church historically, and lots of other things which needs to be dismantled completely, and and it's taking too long.
Tony, just as an older gentleman, as you mentioned, would you find
I'm
that...
not quite, I'm a gentleman. I've never described myself as a gentleman. So I think
Apologies.
we'll erase that one.
Okay, apologies, my bad. As an older person, would you find that, would it be challenging for yourself, I suppose, to kind of network within the LGBT community?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's ever been an issue. I think the issue is actually, it's conversation, is that, when you grew up through a certain part of your life in very, very discriminatory setting, where actually you were a minority, and where, I was a young active man out and about kind of in the 80s, during the AIDS crisis and whatever is, there were a whole set of other everyday prejudices that one came up against and whatever. And you had to be very, very careful where you gathered, who you were, what you could do and whatever. So it became a second nature to kind of be very, very closed and discreet in many ways until you felt very, very comfortable with people. And that was the same thing in work situations or whatever. I was very lucky because I worked in a very liberal, open, both in an education system when I was living in the UK. I'm Irish, but I went there as a child and came back here in later life, really. And then I was, then I was working in the arts, and I've worked in the arts for the best part of 40 years, I suppose, in a way. And, there was an assumption, therefore, that if you were, LGBT, whatever, you could pass in the arts. You could to a certain extent. But there were, and there still are, ingrained prejudices and discrimination, even in some of the structures there. So I have such admiration for you two who are younger than me, and for the younger generation, and even the younger generation now, even younger than you, who are not having this anymore. And it's a source of pride and joy and pleasure, without, to see how people are navigating that, and not without its challenges, because I think the more open this conversation talk is, of course, the people who hate this change and hate this inclusiveness and hate the fact that we even exist become even more vociferous and more dangerous in many ways. And we also, and I'll just finish in a moment, we also have there's a silent majority of people within the kind of heterosexual normative community who are really positive and disposed to this change, but they very rarely do people speak up when they need to speak up.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point.
Yeah, I'd like to add a quote that I read today. It's by Susanna Walters, All the Rage, and she published this in 2001, and I quote, it says, the love that dare not speak its name became the love that would not shut up.
Wow. What do you make of that quote in particular? Like, what do you think that means?
To me?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that speaks like volumes, because listening to Tony right now, speaking of the struggles and the prejudice and discriminations that they went through in the 80s, which we do still face them now, but not as intense as they used to. And I'm sure like having gay pride or stuff like that was not so common as it is right now. It's like a big festival. You probably had less numbers back then. So it's like, it's June, Pride Month, and everyone is like, all the businesses, banks, your organizations are having the gay flag banner, and it speaks out loud, it shouts. Whereas before it was like you'd go to a pub and be shunned, and all of that. So it speaks volume.
Jensen, I know you were going to come in there. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
Oh, no, it's fine. It's one of the trials of Zoom screens that we've all experienced. It's really hard to practice turn taking properly and cues. Can't read body language over screens. But yeah, it was more to add to what Agatha and Tony said. Firstly, in recognition of people from Tony's generation, like we're just building on the work and challenges that they faced and overcome. And in terms of what he said about stereotypes and this kind of heteronormative stereotypes where everybody's presumed to be heterosexual, I think that's actually a problem of stereotypes for people who are gay, bi, or trans as well when it comes to direct provision as well, because there is this stereotyping of what it means to be gay, bi, or trans that affects people when they're applying for asylum on grounds of sexual orientation or gender identity. So we've seen it in Ireland and in other European countries, and in any country that accepts, because not all countries accept people for asylum based on their sexual orientation or gender identity, where they're questioned about their sexuality, to be like, okay, well, prove that you're a lesbian. Or, how could you be gay? You don't know where the George is, which was actually a case previously that eventually led to some backlash, but somebody was refused asylum on the initial case because they didn't know where the George was, and they were in a direct provision centre somewhere in the Midlands, so, like these kind of, the stereotypes that surround gender are still so strong. And while there's a heteronormative assumption, the negative stereotyping, or just the essentialist stereotyping of who LGBT people are as individuals, has an effect, And one thing that, like when Aggie was giving the example of the roommate, that like it's a funny enough story when you talk about it, but it can also be a dangerous situation for some people, and people may be housed with people who are seeking asylum for very different reasons, like political persecution or something else, but who might be quite homophobic,
Yes.
And that's scary. And I wonder for young people who, because the waiting lists are so long, the waiting for a decision are so long, young people who come to the realization that they're a member of the community, having been in direct provision for years, I can't even imagine. And I don't know if Aggie can shine any light on that, because obviously I haven't been in the system, but it's just something that I think is stark when it comes to LGBTI people in direct provision. It's just, like I said, it's completely unsuited, to recognize or provide space for LGBTI people.
Definitely. Sorry, Tony, you can go ahead.
No, I was going to say, because let me just say another, just to contrast that, because I think absolutely where you can see things can change. I've been in recent times over the last, well, not over the last year, I haven't been anywhere over the last year, but previously, during the last Pride before lockdown, I went into 2 or 3 schools in Tala that I visit quite regularly for the work that we do as an arts organisation. And it was amazing because there was very, very clear, very, very clear celebration of Pride in those schools. And actually it was amazing. And I was just saying to some of the students there, I said, for me, I can't believe this. I said, when I was at school, there was no way that anybody even, I'm not even sure when I was their age that we weren't even quite sure who we were, even the people that we recognized in my all boys school, et cetera, et cetera. So to see the change that can go on institutionally, it can happen. But I think the thing is that, that's because some schools and the teaching profession is trying to be progressive about this, and actually in a way provide a space for young people in the education system to be able to begin to express themselves in a way that they might not be able to, even when they step outside of the school gates and go back into their own immediate local community and even into their own households and wider family friendship groups. So this is why I think there has to be some very, very, there has to be some leadership from everybody, not just from the LGBTQ community, to change these institutional frameworks, so that one removes that anxiety, fear, stigma, all of those things. And actually people think very, very carefully how people are placed and where they're placed in whatever situation, so they don't come, as Jensen says, into that moment of anxiety when, who is this person that I'm in a space with? What do they know? What do they know? Do I feel comfortable? Do I feel safe? And what and whatever. And and that I should be able to rely on other people within the vicinity, outside or around, who will be supportive of me in this context.
Yeah, save it. Just you're relying on like a lottery system almost. You're just like, oh, better have your fingers crossed. Let's hope I'm bloody just placed somewhere there that they're accepting and supportive. It's it's not healthy at all. Just on something that Jensen was saying there, Aggie. Like obviously when you were explaining it there, it was quite lighthearted, and the way you were explaining it was funny or whatever. But the actual anxiety of that and the like, we've heard experiences where it is quite frightening, and the level of hostility that people are met with when they're kind of revealing themselves to their roommates or whatever, it can be quite high. Can you share a little bit more kind of light on that kind of circumstance and that situation?
Agatha, me?
Yeah.
So for example, like we used to be 3 in the room. One of my roommates is Muslim, and one is an old woman. So I don't know, an older woman. She's in her 60s, and it was very difficult, like to just be myself. Like when we have conversations, an older woman would ask you, especially an African older woman would ask you, "Are you married? Where's your husband? When I have kids?" And that's like normal conversations that you'd have with them. So you start talking. I don't like. You lie to a certain extent, but it starts affecting you, if you know what I mean. And my other roommate, being a Muslim, made it just another problem. Like, she's like, this is haram, that is haram, you can't think. So even after I came out to her, until very recently, and we've been together here for more than a year, she would still say, "Are you sure, Iggy? Just try." And that is so offensive. But then I have to understand. And the sad part is that I, the person who is a victim where I'm coming from and has been through a lot, have to now come here at a place where I thought I'm going to be safe and accept what other people have to say or what they think, or trying to change me, because my family is trying to change. I don't want to be going through that again. So it took a lot. It right now she's I could say I'm happy. It's the 2 of us now. The old lady has moved out, which I'm also happy, because when I came out to her, I said, please don't tell the old lady, because she's a God-fearing woman. She prays every night, and I know my family are God-fearing, and it's just too much anxiety. Like when it comes to when they start praying for you and saying Jesus be with everything, like it's my
quite intense.
It's very intense, and my whole thing, my whole point of view with church and Jesus, and I wouldn't say it's the same with some other people. Like when I think about it, I don't go to church, but I'm a Christian woman because I'm Christian by birth, but I don't go to church because of how, like, growing up, I was told that this is that, this is that, this is that, you were bad, you were evil, so that has stayed in my mind for so long. And if I start telling someone who's God-fearing, I just don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. But then in terms of like having to be around people, there's some people who would probably see me and think, okay, maybe she is, you can see them eyes, they kind of like speculating, like, is she not? Then there's some people who just don't know what's happening, because you get like some man that still hits on you and you like, how do I start? Is it going to be safe for me to say this? Should I not say it? It's just a whole conversation that you have with yourself. And I don't tell anybody. It's just my roommates in this whole place that I have said and confirmed that, okay, this is who I am. But with anyone outside, I just have to accept whatever comes along, whether if they hit on me, I'll be like, I'm not interested. Still hit on you, I am not interested. And it's just an ongoing thing, coming back, because it's so many people from a lot of especially African countries, and I kind of do understand where they might also be coming from. So it's just a whole understanding game, I guess, for me, until I am able to get out of direct provision.
Is there anyone that you can kind of go to, I suppose, with those kind of concerns and go, look, I need to maybe be relocated or anything like that? Or is there things like that? Is there a person that you can go to kind of voice those concerns?
I am part of East Rainbow Mude, which is an LGBT peer group for people in international protection or migrants or minorities. And that's where I go on, like every month we meet. We get time to offload.
Yeah.
Everyone gets time to offload about what's happening. It's not so far. I mean, they do try and help as much as they can, but so far we've got members who live like outside of Dublin who experienced worse things. Like one of the members had someone slipping a pamphlet under a door, a church pamphlet, like go to church. Some people put on messages under the door, prayers under the door. And I can just imagine how that feels. I haven't had that, but I can imagine. I know how it could feel like, you know. So
that's what Tony mentioned about the institutional frameworks. It's something that absolutely needs to be broken right down and burned down to the ground, basically. And like, we need to start this thing from scratch and throw the book out. Jensen, I want to ask you about because I never got to you about this. Sorry, kind of gone off on a few tangents there. We have. Do you face, I suppose, many barriers networking in the LGBT plus community?
Not really personally. So I would have been out as gay for years before I came out as trans. So I already had quite a strong network from that, and I think that was easier. And I was involved and belonged to the youth group when I was young, and for me that was actually pivotal because growing up I was the only LGBTI person I knew, like no family members, no neighbors, complete isolation, and internalized homophobia for a long time, where I felt really alienated. I was outed by a friend that I came out to, who was no longer my friend after that, to my entire estate before I'd come out to my parents. And it was kind of a really difficult situation, because you have the teenagers in your estate, and it got into my school and stuff like that. And my classmates were grand because they liked me. But those who didn't like me or didn't know me and know from the other years, they would be insulting or really sexually suggestive or incredibly invasive. For me, the worst thing was having constant questions about sex asked, and I'm a 17-year-old. I like I didn't want to talk about it, but yeah, it's just crossing boundaries. So I found belong to, and I kind of met this peers, just people that automatic barriers, and I could just be a teenager. And I also found local friends who, a couple of them later came out as LGBT, but they're still my friends today, like a large group mix of people who are members of the community and people who are not. And I feel like going to belong to back in the day gave me the confidence I needed to just find the right people, rather than seeing people who might have been immature at the time, or who might have, because like I think my friend wasn't just immature at the time, and like part of an overall, they say don't lick it up off the street, it's handed down to you, discriminatory attitudes, and we've come a long way. So that helped me a lot, so that when I came out as trans, but I didn't come out as trans until I was 25, so I'd already finished college, I'd lived abroad, and I came out when I was abroad. I needed the space to get away from so many things, so I could actually just step into myself without the weight of expectations. And my fear was, having come out once and had such a negative repercussion, I didn't want to experience that rejection again. And I can relate to what Aggie said about, just not wanting to deal with it, because it's not just a matter of not being bothered. It's that it brings up all these emotions, and it feels like it's really anxiety inducing. And that's part of the kind of the weight of stigma discrimination that adds to the negative mental health outcomes for a lot of LGBTI people, is that it can be unrelenting sometimes. And before you come out, when I came out when I was 25, I think I had an easier time of it because I was also older, and I think people doubt the sexuality and gender identity of people when they're younger, mostly because they've never had to deal with coming out, so they doubt other people. But the only authority on a person is themselves. They're the only people who know who they are, and
Can I ask about that experience, Jensen? Because I think, like, obviously, when by doing things like this, I suppose, and kind of talking about it in a public sphere, it kind of makes it easier, I suppose, for people to kind of experience that coming out process as well, and like acceptance of themselves in a sense too. When when you did finally kind of, I suppose, come out when you were 25 as trans, I suppose, what was that experience like? And tell me about, like, maybe kind of working up to it, and maybe like telling who did you tell, I suppose, or was it your parents, was it, or whoever, your family?
Oh, well, I actually took a long time to come out to my parents. They were the last. I'd already come out to them once, and they like were accepting, after a bit of a it's a process when you come out sometimes to your parents. There can be acceptance followed by a period of questioning, and this is obviously just my opinion. I know some parents aren't accepting, but in my case it was, they accepted me, but there was a bit of a process there, including, I think, preconceived notions about what it means to be gay, like not necessarily having a life partner or being able to have a family, or discrimination, because they're coming from their background as well. If, like, they know now that I have healthy friends group, full-time job, decent education. All of these things are not ruled out in Ireland if you are openly a member of the community. And yeah, like I said, I was worried about coming out again, because I did lose a few friends, and there were challenges, but I was afraid of upsetting that acceptance with something else that set me apart, because I had already been othered in some ways. So how to come out, and to come out as non-binary trans, when there was already just not that much awareness of trans issues in general. And I moved to Brussels, and I was actually interning there, and I ended up getting another internship after my first one, with an LGBTI youth and student organization. And that's the best place to come out, because they were experienced, and it was a very safe space. Their bathrooms were gender neutral. There was none of that. There was none of those issues there. I was very, very lucky. And having that, and the internship was only 5 months, but having 5 months where I could go into work every day and be comfortable, and yeah, just generally not having to worry about it. It wasn't this weight on my shoulders. I think of coming out and different things like the relief you get when you pay off debts. I think coming out as trans and following that pathway was like paying off a mortgage. It didn't solve every problem in life, but it meant one less massive thing that was dogging me down. And then I started to come out to the people that I had the greatest confidence in. So my best friends, and their acceptance helped me build up the confidence so that I could just be open. Yeah, it's the confidence and the trust. It's the fear of backlash is a big thing, and that's very hard to describe to people, because I think a lot of people think that because we've had marriage equality, because we are one of the more liberal states legally and culturally nowadays for LGBTI people, that everything's sorted, done and dusted. Oh, you can get married, there's no other issues. When you grow up as a member of the community in a heteronormative society, you notice all the way you don't fit in. You notice when there's homophobia, and like I can tell you, it's I can count on. I'd have to take off my shoes and socks to count the number of times I've been called a slur based sexuality or a gender identity while walking down the streets, and that's like in Tala, like this isn't sorted, and we know it's not sorted, and we know that we're not safe in every environment. There are barriers in other areas, and you can be in a place where you feel, safe and comfortable, but you don't always know what people are thinking. And for me, I'm like, I think marriage equality was great. 62% of people who voted yes, 38% didn't. And that's only the people who got out there and voted. And these are things where it might be like, oh, you should be grateful. I'm like, I am grateful. I'm grateful every day that I can live in a society where I'm not imprisoned or, subject to laws and policies that are negatively affecting me every day. I'm lucky. but that doesn't mean that there isn't persistent discrimination, and including in some legal areas in Ireland as well. Like, we've come a long way, but there are still issues at play. And yeah, so
I know there's been some, as you mentioned, there has been it's been a long road, and there is steps being taken. And just because the referendum got through or whatever, as you mentioned there, with the 62%, it doesn't mean that we're done. And that's a very important thing to bring up. And the conversation around the gender neutral bathrooms is something I'm absolutely sick of hearing, because it's so obvious. Like, it's so obvious. I just don't understand how people can't understand that we need to have gender neutral bathrooms. Like, I can't understand that. I can't wrap my head around that. It's just so archaic. It's so embedded in, as Tony mentioned, the institutional frameworks of the way we've developed our society here in Ireland. And it's so tied to the Catholic Church, as Tony mentioned as well. And it's quite obvious to maybe younger people, I suppose, as well, but it's maybe the older generations that maybe don't understand it. I don't mean to necessarily be putting it all on them either. But I wanted to bring you in, Tony, because I see you have your hand up there. Did you want to add on a point there?
Yeah, I just think, the thing is, it's always incumbent on us to be the people who come out. And I turn around now to lots of people and I say, well, I make theatre. So I want to make a show about a white straight man coming out as a white straight man. Let's think about it. I talked to the so okay, so you came out as a white straight woman. Tell me about that. And they go, what? I said, well, just tell me. What's it? Why do I have to declare myself? You assume, you grow up, you assume you're in this majority where you assume everything is how it is, and anybody else who's different has to explain their difference in order to exist in the space. So you create a little space, so you actually allow people to exist. That's outrageous. That's outrageous.
I have to say, Tony,
think about that's totally
idea.
Outrageous.
Yeah, it is.
So let's talk about how people come out as being straight or whatever they determine themselves to be. Let's talk about that, because then let's see what that means, that articulation, that actual verbal articulation to your friends, to your family, to everything, to go in, hey, mum, I want to tell you something. I'm straight. And I'm white and I'm straight and I'm all of that thing, whatever, because actually what happens is people assume all sorts of things, and those things don't even get talked about in families, which is why also the confusion exists in many cases where people have deep mental health and emotional things, because they're actually confused about who they are. So they stay in some place that seems to be the place to stay in because the majority is, and that may not suit them. It may be that they're not LGBTQ or anything else. It may not be that, but actually they have to stay within the confines of what determines the majority. And that is unspoken. So actually part of the work that needs to be done is for when these things are being discussed in families and schools and whatever, there is this conversation. So what determines how you decide that you're heteronormative? What determines that? And what does that feel like to talk about that to other people as opposed to remain silent?
Wow. Geez, that's a mic drop moment, Tony. That really is absolutely brilliant. Like, really is. And it completely subverts people's expectations, that does. And it's a totally different way of thinking.
So why do we have to fit in and explain a situation and parameters and determine the territory that we're able to take, both emotional and physical and social, when other people don't have to think about that?
Does that come from your own frustrations with having to kind of declare yourself?
I think it's just, I have a very strong, from very early childhood, even before I could articulate and conscious about who I was, I had a very strong sense of social justice. I couldn't have explained it in those terms, but I had a very, very sense of right and wrong. And I could see very, very early where certain people I used to wander in a family, a very large extended family, in those days, between the men's rooms and the women's rooms, where they would gather and listen to them talking about the same thing, but the different perspective about what women were saying about things and what men were saying about things. And I went, oh, this is kind of interesting, and whatever, and then I would choose, be more actually around the women and in that kind of transitional space between the men, or some of the men, whatever. And there are some of the men I didn't want to be around because I had a sense that I didn't like what they were saying and how they behaved and whatever. So I think that you know, yeah, more and more, I'm more and more, it doesn't, wherever anybody is a minority and they're a minority that's persecution, whatever it is, and there's a sense that the majority determines everything, then you have to ask the question, why? Yeah. And how do we shift that power? And how do we shift that perspective so that actually people can be inclusive, can be respected and not accommodated, but respected and embraced into a society that values everybody.
Yeah,
I think that Tony touches on something very careful there when he says not being accommodated, and that's something that's often around the language when it comes to minorities, and it's this language of accommodation, or something that's fallen out of usage but still is implied as tolerance.
Yes.
You know, it's like, I don't need you to tolerate me. You know, I'm going to be me regardless of that, you know, and I'm going to keep existing, you know.
And how dare you even think of that? How
Yeah.
dare you even think that you have the arrogance and the effrontery and that sense of power that you can say to another human being, I tolerate your existence and I give you this much space to exist in, because I have the power to give you this much space, but I can take it away.
You know, like listening to Tony and Jensen speak about what you guys are talking about, I'm just sitting here thinking about a lot. Like I'm always thinking, and how coming from where I'm coming from, the little things were like it was just hard. It's like, okay, this little thing, I'll just hold on to this little thing. Okay, so I can be with my partner, but at a certain, like in my room, this is my room, my safe space. If we go outside, I need to dress feminine. I need to put earrings, and I'm calling, hey girl, how are you? I cannot be holding hands and doing all those things in public, or go to and have dinner and do all these weird things. And getting here, arriving in Ireland and seeing people like being themselves and everything, it's like, wow. And then listening to what you are both saying, and it's like, there's still a long way to go. And I'm like, well, I'm excited about that long way to come, because I've come a long way, you know what I mean? And I would really, I mean, like, I can't have any of these discussions with my family, like none of my family. I can't talk about my relationships. I can't talk about relationship advice. I can't talk about anything with my mom, anybody. Okay. So my sister even disowned me because, like, in 2011, because of my sexuality. And it's like we just have a family group meeting on WhatsApp, and it's that tolerance that you're talking about, like, okay, I just tolerate. And my mom would still come and say, you need to go and apologize. And I'm like, apologize for being me. Like, so I have to be the one who's like, but she's your older sister. So she's my older sister and doesn't like my lifestyle. So what should I do? And then she comes and tells my little sister to come to me and she says, go tell your sister that if she wants to be part of our family, she can come and visit whenever, but she should come alone. Never bring any girlfriend to. And I'm like, okay, so I mean, like, just stay in your lane. If you're gonna want to treat me like I'm the bad person, I'm just being me. I did not steal your husband, cheat on, I don't know, kill your kid or something like that, something crazy. But like, it's so crazy. Like, I'd really love to have like someone that I know is in my life forever, a parent, a cousin, a sister, a brother, where I could be like, this is how it is, you know. I just recently ended my 7-year relationship with my best friend, because she said she accepted who I am, as I am. But recently we had a conversation, and that conversation led, I don't know what acceptance is. I think accepting someone as gay, lesbian, bi, trans, queer it's different for everybody, because she laughed at me and said all things negative about me wanting to have a family in the future. Like, how are you going to have kids? With who? How? You're a woman. She's a woman. I'm like, we've been friends for 7 years, and you are you really gonna ask me? It felt really bad. Like, I really felt offended, and I was like, wow, I've trusted you so much for you to come in and ask me such a question and turn back. But yeah, it's really something to,
like, even for myself, like, looking in, it seems so it's so frustrating from like looking at it. I can't imagine the frustration that you're feeling, like that feeling, like feeling like you have to almost walk on eggshells and like just be careful, I suppose, in a sense, and just to exist within these parameters. It's something that I think a lot of people can't actually wrap their heads around. And I really appreciate you as being so open about it. I really do. And I think we're kind of making some groundwork here, I suppose, in a sense as well. And I really hope that someone listening can really take something from this. I'm conscious of the time now, so there's loads of topics that I wanted to get to that we're not going to have time to get to. But I want to ask you all just one more question each, I suppose, because obviously June is Pride Month all around the world. It's a promotion of equality and I suppose increased visibility for everyone in the LGBTQ plus community, and highlighting the issues that are faced every single day. Tony, I want to ask you first, I suppose. Like, what does pride mean to you?
Well, I can remember a time when actually, when you marched in Pride, and I was in London, I wasn't in Dublin, but even in London, those early days, you marched, you knew those of you who were on the streets were the minority, and those standing on the side were the majority, and the majority weren't with the minority on the street walking. Yeah. So, you know, it was an amazing exhilaration moment of the, I suppose, courage that, you know, and that everybody had to kind of do that and arrive at some place and have a party in a park. And then you've seen it grow over the years. Now, some of that is fantastic because it means that people have changed their attitudes and minds, but also it's been accommodated kind of into a commercialized cultural framework where we can buy sets of experiences. So part of me is hugely proud of the span of time and how things have changed and the way in which it's kind of part of a cultural social calendar. Another part to go, well, it's not quite all of that, really. And I think that's, you know, which is what I'm talking about, that actually, you know, it's when people say, oh, we're having Black History Month. Well, no, Black History Month exists every month, as does everything else, as does Women's History and whatever. It's not just one month set aside of the year and whatever is actually. So what happens after that month? So everybody goes back to that way in which everything used to be done? No. I think there's a business about this celebration and of change and progressiveness amongst people that should happen all the time. And yes, it's good to have the party. Of course, it's good to have the party. So I'm very proud that we can have a party now in this country for the moment. And I say for the moment because we've only got to look at some other countries in Eastern Europe and elsewhere where those rights are being eroded and been trying to be taken away after they've been legislated. So don't think because somebody signed a bit of paper in one of our parliaments that everything is okay. It's only okay when deeply in people's culture and social constructs in families. It's what Aggie's been saying about within her own family, where people go, this is just how it is. And all of us in this extended family friendship, people come from all sorts of different perspectives in life, and that's how it should be.
Very good point you brought up about Black History Month as well. That was something that after the death of George Floyd last year, and it was absolutely everyone was doing a podcast, a TV show, a documentary. So it was all over the news about, I suppose, rights and stuff like that. And then, like, especially for like Black people and people of color. And then after that, it just petered out, and you barely heard a word since then. And it's a very good point that you bring up, Tony. Yeah, I want to ask you as well yourself as well, Jensen. Like, I suppose, what does pride mean to you?
I guess, like, first and foremost, for me, I do see it as a protest, but also like, it's definitely a party as well. We're celebrating openness and being ourselves and just frivolity, and it's a chance for everybody to come together. And I always say at Pride is like, God, I had no idea there were so many queers in Ireland, but once a year they turn up, But primarily for me as well, it's also about recognizing that we're not just marching for people in Ireland. There's 69 countries in the world that criminalize homosexuality to some degree, whether direct laws about homosexuality or under other laws like gross indecency and other offensive language, to be honest, to describe consensual same-sex relations. There's 6 that punish it actively in law with the death penalty, and another 5 that allow for the death penalty in those cases. So like every time I'm marching, I'm thinking of them, and I don't just go to the party at Pride. I like to march because I think, you know, we can't just let it become a party. You know, the party part is important. That celebration, that refusal to just be tolerated, but to be unabashedly out there and yourself is very, very important. But it can't just be a party. It's a commemoration. It's a sign that the fight is not over for so many people, and that there are people still suffering and dying for being members of the community. You know, so that's what it means to me.
Yeah, brilliant. You spoke very well. I get to, what does Pride mean to you?
First of all, like I'd like to say thank you to Jensen right now, because my first Pride march was 2 years ago, the Dublin Pride, and I've never marched before that. I've been to Prides in South Africa, where I just go to the after party because I've always been skeptical of like the dangers around who can attack who and what could happen during the marches. So for me, Pride has been something of like, okay, the march was powerful, I could say. I think the march is like Pride, you know, the march, because I felt so happy and overjoyed and overwhelmed to see so many people screaming, smiling, happy. And I was like, okay, so this love that we all have right here has no borders. This love that we have right here has no color, you know, it has no discrimination, prejudice. Everyone was smiling, all dogs, all children, all people, colorful and everything. And I don't even understand why it has to be like LGBT, because we had allies as well. It's not like it was just the gay people and the lesbian, you know what I mean? And why can't it be like this all the time? That's why it was like, why can't everyone be happy like this? It was such a happy Pride march. And it's so good to see that, like, it's so good to see people I was marching, so seeing people from the sidelines screaming and shouting, it's like they're happy for me. Like, okay, yeah, I'm okay, thank you, I know, yeah, okay. So it's, I'm still yet to find words for it, but Pride March for me has been something that is, it's happiness, it's love, it's equality, and what Jensen just said right now, which was like an eye opener, like, you know, solidarity for others, for other countries and all of that. So yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. I just had to say, I'm so appreciative of the 3 of you coming on the Local Voices podcast this week. I really am. I'm short on words. You all spoke so well, and yeah, just thanks very much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Lovely meeting everybody. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into Local Voices. If you haven't already, please be sure to follow the show on your streaming platform of choice, or subscribe to the Echo newspaper on YouTube to never miss a minute.